What happens when the foundations of your beliefs crumble, leaving you staring into the abyss? How do you find meaning in a world that offers none? Friedrich Nietzsche grappled with these profound questions, positioning him at the heart of one of the most critical shifts in Western history. Nietzsche didn't just witness the collapse of traditional religious faith, he predicted both its cause and consequence. He foresaw the vacuum left behind by the crumbling of Western religious foundations and sought revolutionary ideas to fill that void. Standing at the crossroads of faith and nihilism, Nietzsche attempted to carve out a new path, a third way, that neither relied on religion nor succumbed to the despair of meaninglessness. Born in 1844 in Saxony, Prussia, modern-day Germany, Nietzsche came from modest beginnings and lived a relatively ordinary and sheltered childhood. His father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, was the local Lutheran pastor, immersing young Friedrich deeply in the Christian faith from an early age. Yet it wasn't long before this faith was shaken to its core. When Nietzsche was just 5 years old, his father, the man who had preached the word of God, was diagnosed with a terminal brain disease. After a year of agonizing suffering, Nietzsche's father died at the age of 35. Tragedy didn't stop there. Just a year later, his younger brother Ludwig also passed away. These early encounters with inexplicable suffering and death likely planted the seeds of Nietzsche's future philosophical inquiries. Nietzsche's early life, marked by loneliness and sorrow, set the tone for his intellectual journey. He eventually studied theology at the University of Bonn, showing great promise in his studies, particularly in Christian theology. However, it didn't take long for Nietzsche's intellectual rigor to clash with his religious upbringing. After just one semester at university, Nietzsche's exposure to various critiques of Christianity led him to question everything he had been taught. He let go of his faith, shedding the innocence of blind devotion. This crisis of belief marked a turning point in Nietzsche's life, leading him to study philology and the history of language at the University of Leipzig. Here, his brilliance became undeniable. By his mid-20s, Nietzsche was appointed professor of classical philology at the University of Basel. He was the youngest professor to hold that position, a record that still stands today. However, academic life did not satisfy Nietzsche for long. He grew increasingly disillusioned with the constraints of academia and, compounded by his deteriorating health, left his teaching position after only a few years. Nietzsche's health issues, believed to be a combination of genetic ailments and syphilis, which he likely contracted from a brothel, forced him into a life of isolation. He spent much of his time traveling across Europe seeking climates to alleviate his symptoms. For much of his later life, Nietzsche resided in the Swiss Alps, where he experienced alternating periods of productivity and debilitating illness. During these years of isolation, Nietzsche produced his most influential works. Despite suffering from physical ailments, failed relationships, and increasingly strained family ties, he found solace in his philosophical musings. Works like Human, All Too Human, The Gay Science, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, and On the Genealogy of Morals became testaments to his relentless pursuit of understanding. In these texts, Nietzsche laid the groundwork for radically rethinking human values. He dismantled traditional notions of good and evil, right and wrong, asserting that these concepts were not objective truths, but social constructs meant to control and pacify. One of Nietzsche's most famous and controversial declarations, God is dead, encapsulates his existential concerns. This was not a triumphant cry celebrating the death of faith, but a stark warning. With the collapse of Christianity, Nietzsche foresaw a catastrophic moral vacuum. He feared that, without a replacement for the ethical structure provided by religion, humanity would descend into nihilism, an existential crisis in which life, stripped of meaning, leads to despair. In his view, the challenge was not merely the absence of God, but the lack of any transcendent moral framework to guide humanity. At the core of Nietzsche's solution to this crisis was rejecting universal, objective truths. In his words, there are no facts, only interpretations. For Nietzsche, the pursuit of a single, all-encompassing truth was a futile endeavor. Instead, he championed subjective experience, urging individuals to create values and meanings through personal expression and creativity. He believed the arts, philosophy, and literature were critical vehicles for this kind of self-creation, allowing individuals to tap into more profound, more personal truths. However, Nietzsche didn't stop at cultural expressions. As he delved deeper into his philosophical explorations, he realized that even art and culture could become commodified, losing their authenticity. This led him to advocate for a philosophy that placed the individual, rather than society or culture, at the center. This thinking emerged from Nietzsche's concept of the Ubermensch, or Overman. The Übermensch represents an idealized version of oneself, a figure transcending traditional morality, who pursues personal greatness and creative expression without being hindered by societal expectations or religious dogma. The Übermensch is defiant, unapologetically individualistic, and strategic in pursuing personal power, not power over others, but power over oneself. Nietzsche's philosophy here advocates for self-mastery, where personal growth is fueled by a continuous process of overcoming limitations and striving for greatness. This relentless pursuit of self-improvement, which Nietzsche called self-overcoming, is fundamental to his answer to the question of meaning in a godless world. Yet Nietzsche's ideas also spark challenging questions. Is suffering truly necessary for growth? Can a life marked by perpetual striving and dissatisfaction really lead to fulfillment? And what happens if someone rejects Nietzsche's premise altogether, if they don't see life as a pursuit of greatness, or view suffering not as a means of self-overcoming, but as a burden to be avoided? Nietzsche's philosophy, while profound, is not without its critics, and these questions highlight the tension at the heart of his ideas. As Nietzsche himself experienced, pursuing philosophical truth can come at a cost. In his later years, he succumbed to madness, a decline that culminated in a public breakdown. He famously embraced a horse being flogged on the streets, whispering, "I understand you." Whether this episode represented a contradiction of his philosophy, an outpouring of compassion in a man who championed strength and defiance, or a mind collapsing under the weight of its brilliance, remains open to interpretation. Nietzsche died in 1900 at age 55, having never achieved the recognition he craved during his lifetime. His works were largely ignored, and he lived in obscurity. Yet after his death, his ideas exploded into public consciousness, influencing generations of thinkers, artists, and political movements. Unfortunately, some of his ideas were misused and misinterpreted in ways that Nietzsche would likely have hated, but his intellectual legacy remains potent and undeniable. As you reflect on Nietzsche's life and philosophy, consider this. How much are you willing to sacrifice in the pursuit of greatness? Can suffering be transformed into strength, or does it sometimes break us beyond repair? Nietzsche believed in the possibility of self-transcendence, but the path he laid out was not an easy one. It demands introspection, courage, and a willingness to confront the void left by the absence of absolute truths. And yet, perhaps that is where life's most profound meaning can be found, not in the answers we are given, but in the ones we create for ourselves. In his famous words, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." Do you have your why?